1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Hello, we are the experts.
Everybody, stump the experts. Exactly. I was gonna say, who remembers? Who have some kind of relation with the words "stump the experts"? That's a good amount of old people here. So for those who don't know, Stump the Experts used to be a panel of people from Apple at WWDC in an evening where you could stump the experts, where you could ask them questions that they wouldn't be able to answer. And it was very, very funny. And at one point, they removed it to us. So since that day, I've been very, very sad. But just for me, like every single decision Apple takes, I take it personally. The headphone jack? No, I'm kidding, because I don't really care about the headphone jack.
But you know stuff, that's just courage.
That's courage, exactly. So speaking about courage, we have 3 microphones. So I would just give it to random people.
How many nails?
And how many nails? James, do you have nails for the microphones? And whoever takes the microphone, just deal with the mic, like share the mic. We have you have 3 mics for 10 people. I have 1 mic for 1 guy. This is the way I run the conference. And yeah, we have another mic, which is like a virtual mic, which is you in the room shouting. I realized, like every year, that whenever we do the panel, there is all of a sudden 10 free seats in the room. So last year we were smart enough to invite a couple of people from marketing or whatever from downstairs, but this year we forgot about those people. So, like we told them, just sit down. Yeah, all right, so let's start. I have myself a couple of questions, but I'm obviously hoping that you guys will have questions, because over years, with organizing conference, I get less and less and less prepared. So
More and more wasted.
yeah, so
It's called priority.
well, you'd have to hope that next year I will not forget to put a shirt on or something like that, because I get less and less prepared. I try to inspire myself this year from the different talks that we have seen and that we will see. Obviously, especially for the talks that we have not seen yet, don't burn the talks. So those are the best. And so don't spoil your talk and try to like if I'm asking a question, where be protective of your talk, because like if there's another guy who's like completely like ruining your talk for tomorrow, then I can totally foresee one of the speakers from tomorrow thinking like, gosh, I have to change the slides now. They said that already today. Yeah. You know, I don't speak a lot to conference, but I did it a couple of times, and I always ask to be at the beginning, because if there is one thing, or fairly at the beginning, not necessarily the first one, because I can totally foresee myself changing the slides all day long. So yeah, do you see what I'm speaking about? Last speaker for tomorrow.
I know that feeling. I really do.
All right, let's actually start with diversity. We had a wonderful start this morning, wonderful keynote speaking about diversity. And we spoke a little bit about that, but I wanted to have the take on every single one of you, if it's possible. Not everybody has to talk, obviously, and see how we can make it better, not only for having more women in our community, but more people. Like I'm taking the good example of I'm working with refugees, for example, in Germany, and I know we were speaking about CVs, and that potentially some people. By the way, luckily not at 7 Principles, because we actually have one Arabic person, female developer, so it's like fitting all things together. So it seems to work here. But I can totally see that when some people are reading a CV from, say, an Arabic person, for example, they consider the CV in another way, which is kind of weird. So I'm trying to get a grasp from you guys on how we can make this community more diverse in terms of a bunch of different stuff, cultural, race, religions, whatever, and also technological fields, which is going to be another turn of the question at one point, like because of opening Swift more to the world, we don't have to be the finger pointing at Java developers and accept those people as well. So yeah, who wants to have a take on diversity? It's always who wants to be the first one to speak. Oh, you have the mic. Like I have the mic, so I will say something.
Hello.
Is your mic working?
Testing. See, you broke.
Say it again.
Come on, audio engineer, fix it.
I don't do that.
Just like hammer something.
Hello.
What's the microphone? Take the other one, which has a
You can take this one.
That's all we do, right?
Yeah.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah, this one works.
All right. So I have a mic now. Honestly, depending on what day you ask me, diversity, the fix for diversity changes. Right now, I think I'm at the place where a lot of it is not necessarily trying to get more people of color or women or whatever, but sort of addressing the environment that we have, and making it more pleasant for those people, and actually, trying to change some of the things that we consider perks and change some of the things that we consider team building exercises. Like, I always end up accidentally calling out people. The brew house that folks went to was pleasant and nice and fun, but things like going to a brew house where it's like, okay, well, there's a bunch of beer and there's a bunch of this and there's a bunch of that, and sometimes mix it up, right? I'm not saying don't do those events ever, but if you're like, oh, I'm going to a conference, they will have something at a brew house. This is what is going to happen. That becomes, like, I don't drink alcohol, I don't eat meat. So when I go to these things, I am only going for you fine people. But things like, oh, we have ping pong. Oh, we have beer on tap all the time at our place. We have cappuccino machines. Some of those things just aren't perks to certain people, right? If you're like, well, I have children at home, I have this, I have that. Like, what I really want is a good schedule, and I want childcare, or I want this, or I want that, and also having an environment where we don't have emails like the one that, the memo thing that went out from Google, and then people defending that and talking about how he had well-reasoned arguments if you actually just read it. It's like, the dude said he can't work with women, and you are confused as to why women might not want to work with him. Like, come on. Just simple things like that, like make it so that people would actually feel welcome and like they can be productive and not questioned just on principle.
It's funny that you mentioned the Brauhaus, because as many people know, I'm vegan. So that's one step further. And I was the one who chose the Brauhaus. And the reason I chose it was, and I don't drink a lot of alcohol, actually. Andreas, my colleague, made fun of me today because I called a beer a Radler, or a Radler a beer. Was saying me, oh, there's no alcohol. So, but the Brauhaus is the reason why I chose those places, because I know those places, except for the fact that they serve dead animals, they are wonderful gatherings of people, and that's the reason I chose it. But you're right. I was thinking during Jeff's talk about that story about the airbag. I already had heard that story. This is like the most terrible story ever, and a lot of time you need a bunch of different people to test your apps, for example, and that's not so much about diversity, but me being a little bit colorblind. Sometimes I look at some advertisement or apps and I'm like, I cannot use this thing. So this is also about diversity, about like accessibility or stuff like that. It's really hard. I find it pretty hard not to only think about you as the person, but see it in a more broader way. Jeff, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, so TJ pointed out that this morning I left out a really important point in my presentation. I always forget something, except usually it's not quite so important. The bit about Google, I saw a lot of people nodding along, so obviously some people know the story. I alluded to the fact that there was a really horrible result. The software for categorizing the photographs, when it was presented with people of color, it was forced to make a categorization. And it categorized them as gorillas.
Oh, wow.
So if you're not familiar with the story, what I was getting at is that Google did the worst possible thing. It didn't simply say, I don't know. It impugned, similarly to historic precedents in the United States, that these were not people.
This works.
These were animals. And this caused an immense uproar, which was entirely justified. Google wasn't necessarily acting out of racism, but their intentions don't matter. It doesn't really matter that they didn't intend to offend anyone. It doesn't really matter that they didn't intend to create software that was labeling black people as gorillas. They did create software that labeled black people as gorillas, just as the soap dispenser may not have intended to refuse to dispense soap to black people, but there's a good chance that that company may be facing liability charges for discrimination. And I'm pretty sure that you don't want to be the software engineer that causes your company millions, if not billions of dollars worth of legal damages because you only tested it on yourself. I mean, that's fine if you're doing like, I don't know, like crazy drug trials, but I don't know that you want to do it on other things. So, sorry, we're going to just hog the mic here.
Why not? Two things. I love that gorilla story so much. It's just,
And obviously, I
it's
think
just,
two talks.
it's just so funny to me because it was clearly accidental, and I know someone at Google was like, it's just, it tickles my soul. But when litigation was mentioned in terms of the soap dispenser or anything, like, you know, people like to say, oh, like America is so litigious and whatnot. But it's actually interesting because how else do you get the attention of a corporate entity? Right? Like, you can have sort of a smear campaign a little bit, but usually decent PR and spin is gonna fight that and counteract that. But like, how else do you tell a corporate entity where a corporation, at least in the US, unfortunately, their speech is money. And so, you know, you have to basically speak back to them in that same way, right? And it sucks, right? I don't think it's great, but it's interesting trying to think about what the right way to basically punish a company for doing something as ill-conceived as that is.
So
Hold the mic.
so
In front of your
regarding
mouth.
the question, like this.
This way.
So regarding the question, what can we do better, and how can we like improve as a community to actually like improve the diversity? I think if we look at the events that we have, and if we look at the conference here today, I haven't seen a lot of women around here. I think like it helps to create like a really welcoming atmosphere for people, but you actually have to explicitly like take actions. You could do like scholarships for people of minorities or something like this. So you can do more. You can reach out to these kinds of organizations like Women Who Code, for example, and ask them if they can promote the event in their kinds of circles and hope that it'll spread in these areas as well. So I think you have to be a lot more active to be sure that you can achieve a more diverse crowd at these kinds of conferences and meetups. You can adopt a code of conduct, for example, to really make sure everybody has a really good time and a safe space here.
So we actually did that not this year, but the year before, over the years. So I don't want to enter too much into it, but yeah, it's we've tried different things, and as terrible as it sounds, the number of women are doubling every year in the conference, and it's not even a joke.
0 multiplied by 2.
There's one more every year. No, it's terrible for me because I've tried different actions. So. But yeah, it's not only me. It's for everybody organizing a conference or hiring or like.
Yeah, for me, like I want to say, like I think like diversity is a key point of the world. Doesn't matter if it's technical or not. And I think often of something, there's one minority that we're all going to become in a community, the developer community, is old. We're all going to get old. And I don't know how many old developers you know past 60 or past 70 or whatever, but I always wonder that question, you know. And when I was in the US, I worked with a guy with like something like, I don't know, 62. And I have to say, he wasn't the fastest coder I've seen. Even like he was typing with 2 fingers, you know, like really taking his time every time. But he taught me a lot of lesson about like every time I was flipping out about something, he was like, okay, let's chill out. We go there, we talk, we will always go away from the computer. And he have all those little strategies that he've learned through his career. And I think for me, that's the point. It doesn't matter, like, as we say, like race, gender, or age, or whatever. It's the point about like more diversity you bring in your day-to-day routine, better you are at finding solutions that you will not have find yourself. And my second example really quickly is my wife. Because often she tells me like, what do you do? And I'm like, yeah, that's complicated. I'm like, I don't say that.
Well, AR is easy to explain.
Yeah,
at least.
It's really easy.
I show stuff that don't exist.
Yeah. No, but like, for example, I say like, oh, I'm rewriting a protocol for and she's like, okay, you know. But when I have conversation with her, sometimes I will tell her something like, oh, I could do that. And she look at me and say like, well, you know, you seem to have the solution. And just this feedback where I was like, I just wanted to complain, you know, in a way like, oh my God, it's so painful or whatever. And she's like, it seemed, and I talk with her and, you know, it helped me to progress. So even people outside the field will still bring you something to what you're doing. So I think we should just do more, even like if it means bringing my wife next year to this conference. My grandmother.
The old thing though is it's for me kind of a no-brainer because anyways, it's not so much as if you are old or not, because there are like 25 years old guys who have been programming Java for the last 7 years and haven't done anything else. The same way as I know people who have been doing SAP for the last 20 years. It's about your the way you think and the way you want to follow the move. So I think and being old is definitely not going to be a minority in the future, generally, because the whole world is getting older. So I think the same way as we have 60 years old rappers now, and it's normal, we will have 70 years old developers because we're going to have to work until that time. Because of, welcome to Germany. All right, go ahead, David.
Yeah, I had 2 quick thoughts about this. One's just for me personally is, it's interesting for me because as a male Asian American, I feel like I'm in this sort of type O minority or like a daywalker type of role where I'm a well-represented minority, especially in technology. So it's interesting where I can have these sort of dialogues with people who aren't represented and people who are, and it's kind of seamless. So that's definitely something I've always seen as a blessing, really something that you can like really empower other people at this sort of level. The other thing that I was thinking about is I think Nikolas talked about community, and I think when I think about diversity, I think a lot about inclusion too. So I wanted to share a bit about the community that Jeff and I are a part of, which is the Seattle Xcoders group. And if you know, this group has some of the most legendary Mac developers when people developed on the Mac. And just really, there's kind of this old guard of people who have really relinquished like the power of the community and made sure that new people are included. So there's different meetup organizers, there's different people speaking, and knowing that it is true indeed what they say, that there's no success without a successor. So really knowing like who's going to replace us when we get older, and that. So I think again, inclusion of like the next generation is another area of diversity that I think is really important.
I was thinking about your tweet that I read that yesterday somebody else here told you that he's a Mac developer, and your answer was awesome. The answer was, "Oh, I know the 8 others." Yeah. So how many originally Mac developers do we have here in the crowd? Originally, before the iPhone. I know it's a very small community, but we love you guys. Yeah. And because so many of us, like me, actually first started on the iPhone and then came to the Mac. Newbie, exactly. I'm a newbie for 9 years. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, right. Somebody else, because otherwise we could just move on to the next thing.
Just
Go ahead.
short through in. So basically, as you are saying you're a day worker, I'm kind of the unicorn. I'm rare of my kind, and I really hate it because everywhere you go, you're just the solo women, kind of. So you see someone else or 2 or 3 else women, but you're alone, kind of. And it started basically at school. It went on university, and that's the trouble. Where do you find women in tech when they don't go into tech? So having them in education and don't just enthusiast them with languages, because I've been to a girls' day which was targeted to girls between 10 and 14. And we had them at Microsoft in Munich and showed them what cool stuff they can do with tech. And most of the girls, which were from a broad variety of schools all over Bavaria, said, I'm a school where I have to learn 3 languages. And I thought, wow, cool. But those are English, French, and some of them Latin. So it's not the languages our kind of people like you to know. So I think there's a really, really big problem there, but the biggest problem is, I think, that we categorize a lot. There are women, there are Asians, there are black, there are whites, and it would be so cool when we don't see this anymore and just appreciate us as a whole community of equal cool nerds. So that's my wish, actually.
My mic is up. We could all be the Smurfs. We're all blue, and we all have no sense.
There was a diversity issue in the Smurfs
There's
as well.
a small diversity issue over there. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I was just before I hand you the mic, I was thinking about Girls' Day. We do that as well as 7 Principles. We've been doing that for the last 2 years. I was lucky enough to be able to have 8 girls of about 13, 14 years old for a full day and try to tell them the thing, to explain them the coding part of it. And it made me think also about this amazing documentary which we showed at SwiftConf 2015, which is called Code, the Gender Gap, from Robin Heuser. So if you haven't seen it, just look it up on your beloved search engine, not to quote a company we just talked about, and gorillas and whatnot. Yeah, it's called the Gender Gap. It's pretty cool. You want to say something?
Yeah, I was just talking about conferences and, the kind of experience in the summer. I, with some of my friends, put on a conference in London around a particular cloud technology. And yeah, we didn't want it to be kind of your typical conference. So we kind of really pushed really hard to get a very diverse kind of audience, and also the speakers. And we had sponsorship where you could buy a ticket for someone else, and we also kept it incredibly cheap, because I think one of the most kind of sometimes very exclusionary things is when tech conferences are like $1,000 for a ticket, right, or $700, because that relies on your company sending you, right? And we managed to keep it around £35, which was really, really cheap by pushing the sponsors very hard. And as a result of that, we had scholarships, we partnered with Girls Who Code, and so we had around 25% of the audience there on scholarships. And for me, my job, I go to a lot of conferences, and it just really felt like a completely different event. It felt like more of like a normal scene in London, of kind of metropolitan city, because it wasn't just kind of young male white people. So it really had quite a different feel. And as well as kind of pushing for the attendees to be more representative of the community that we live in, we also pushed quite hard for the speakers. And actually the best talk on the day was by someone who I used to work with at IBM called Ben, who now works at the Financial Times in London, and he's been doing some really, really interesting stuff with this particular technology. And he came and he gave just an amazing talk about the Financial Times are doing some incredible, like really out there stuff with this particular cloud technology, and it was amazing. But Ben is deaf and also almost blind as well, so it's very hard to see, and he's deaf. And so we arranged, he brought his interpreter along, and the interpreter they were signing to the interpreter, and then she was speaking out. And it was just a completely unique experience. People said, I've never seen like a signed talk at a conference before, except obviously, there's millions of people who are deaf, millions of people who are kind of hard of hearing. And I kind of thought, I've never, at conferences, I never see a signer normally to make the talks accessible for other people. I've never really bumped it. I know Ben, for example, doesn't really go to conferences, never been asked to speak before. And he gave, you can go and watch the talk online. It was brilliant as a standalone technical talk, but also just the experience to make people think, actually, I never really bump into other deaf people or blind people at conferences, and there's no facilities for them. And it's things like that made me now think, so every time I run a conference in future, there's 100% going to be someone signing to make it accessible, because people just don't think and don't realize. So I think by having more diverse speakers and audience, you then start to realize some of the problems that make it difficult for people to attend.
Well, let's hope one of the things we do is, since this year is we're streaming live the whole conference, let's hope it gives other people that they want to come the next year, because obviously you don't come to a conference just for watching at the talks, but you also come for the whole networking and obviously for the beer at SwiftConf. All right, let's move on to something more technical. I was thinking about types and optionals when I saw your talk, Manu, and I was thinking about the exclamation mark that I see in a little bit of code sometime. And this is the code that I see a lot of time from developers that didn't really fully embrace Swift. Like they do Swift the Objective-C way.
Woman? Sorry.
The Objective-C way, yeah. And anyways, the example that I have with that is that I found in some part of this code a lot of uses of any objects, and so I'm not saying that everybody using Objective-C uses ID all over the place. That is not what I'm saying, but there's apparently a small amount of people who still do that. And what I'm trying to get from you is what can we do to kind of fix that problem, so that the people don't embrace only the language and the syntax, but also the concepts. Because you can totally write Objective-C code in Swift, and not without going to the other extreme that you were referencing in your talk, James, about over-engineering stuff and being too smart, like using functional programming everywhere. But still, there's somewhere in between. So who wants to take on that? We need a Swift expert to enter that.
Well, you got me instead. There's the old joke that you can write Fortran in any language. This is an issue that I'm actually dealing with at my new job. It's 99% Objective-C with, at some arbitrary demarcation, they said, okay, everything 4 will be done in Swift. And when I was reviewing the code, I saw exactly one guard statement in all of the Swift classes, and they are all classes. So it becomes an issue of what I call idiomatic Swift. So you write code in the way that the language is encouraging you to write. It's not easy. I find that the big problem is no one has sat down and said, okay, this is how things are done in Swift, and here is why they are done in Swift. So most people here are using Swift, right? Who here has actually read the Swift programming guide?
I did it 3 years ago, the last time. It counts, right?
How many of you are lying? Because I find that most people who sit down to write Swift have never actually read the guide. And it's actually pretty good.
Pretty good.
I mean, as far as guides go, it's pretty good.
Give me a mic. Take the mic. It's gonna be.
It's just not that much.
Take another mic. Take another mic. Give us a little bit of wireless.
Yeah, we actually talked about this on a balcony. I think a big issue here is that most people touch Swift with UIKit, and UIKit has to be backwards compatible with Objective-C. So none of it is idiomatic. It's all uses classes. It can use powerful enums and stuff like that. And unless Apple finds a way to change UIKit to embrace those principles, I don't think it will improve in a meaningful way.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It is very difficult.
This is where I'm thinking, like, if it's going to be easier for to learn Swift in other fields, like, I don't know, server-side or whatnot, which have you less in this kind of UIKit jail, if I can put it this way.
I think in addition, it's something very human too, because people are coding in a language for years. They get something new. They say, okay, I'm capable of programming, and things the way I know it work in this language too. And then they automatically start doing stuff in another language with concepts they know. So that's kind of, you could say, lazy, arrogant, human, I don't know. So it's really a thing to sit down and embrace the new structures, the new concepts behind the new language. And it's work though. It's really work to embrace new concepts and to adopt them in your daily work. So that's hard. It's really hard.
While the microphone is moving, to protect the guys that I'm changing the code for the moment, I am the one who convinced them in 2014, like at the very beginning, to write that project in Swift. And they were like, no, we haven't done that in Swift, and we're going to write it in Objective-C. So I kind of forced them to write the code in Swift, and it ended up being, yeah, we're writing in Swift, but the Objective-C way.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple things, though. Like, I think embracing the new concept is hard, but Swift is very young, and so it's hard to even know completely what the idiomatic way to write Swift is yet. Especially, it's a moving target, so some things change. Like, I would have told you to use strings in a very specific way a year ago, that now that strings are a collection again and we have all this Unicode stuff, it's like, all right, so that's changed some. There's also, there actually is a decent guide. I don't completely agree with everything in it, but I would be remiss if I did not mention Erica Sadoun's book on, like, pragmatic programmers. Yeah, PragPub. I can't remember.
Pragmatic programmers, yeah.
Pragmatic programmers.
Yeah.
And, it's a good guide and it's a good starting place, right? Like, if you disagree with certain things, you have a document that you can disagree with and have a discussion around. But I think that the other part is that Swift allows for more paradigms, right? Like, there's the joke about being too clever and having functional programming everywhere, but if you're not touching UIKit, you can actually get pretty far with only using functional programming, right? I have whole libraries that are written with basically only structs, with very little mutability, and it only becomes sort of an issue once you start to say, okay, well, now I need to put it on the screen, right? And that's for the reasons that we discussed, where UIKit is an Objective-C construct, right? And so until we figure out how to either make a smooth transition or make a second UI library or something, the stress and the tension has more to do with, all right, well, how do I deal with Objective-C still?
Mm-hmm. I mean, Apple started with Foundation, so we'll see how it goes in the future, and if all the other stuff are going to be like more Swifty-ish. That's a nice word. Swifty-ish. Anyone else on this very?
Just, I mean, really quickly. I think also for me, the exclamation.
If you're gonna
point,
do it, don't make it quickly. Make it right.
Sorry. Well, then I'm gonna take my time. No, I think like the only place I might be lying, but where I use exclamation point is like on EB outlet, and I think also like the Swift developer realize, as you said, like they work with a world that exists, the Objective-C and like Xcode, interface builder, or whatever, and there is no way around. I mean, an outlet is not set up yet. It's set up by you for by the system and so on. So you need this optional that is forced to avoid unwrapping it each time. And I think it's like when you build a new, when you have a new island, you build a bridge, and at one point you burn it, but we're not at this point yet. So there's all those legacy that will be burned one day, I hope. But when Apple is ready, and when we also are ready, and I don't think it goes really in the way. It's also like evolving and not, it can be good, give bad habits to some people because it's like, oh, it's there, so I just use it. But it's also really easy to lose if you, try to work around.
And the exclamation bangs are sometimes the right thing. Bang! They're like
Take the mic.
Like using the exclamation point and force unwrapping things sometimes is the right thing, right? Like IB outlets is the right thing. Sometimes, basically you have to use it to mean something. And I think that the thing that we usually chafe against is if you see enough exclamation points, you're like, well, it's not the right thing to do in all of these places. There must be something going on. But using it sometimes makes perfect sense. And I think that it's easy to sort of say that someone's not embracing Swift and not doing the right thing sometimes when, if you look at the code, there was not a better way, or that was the right way, just in general.
Well, when the company I left, we did the shift and we were all Swift. So the running joke with force unwrapping was, I want a bug right here.
Yeah.
But at least you'll know when you hit that bug.
Yeah. Oh, I remember putting that bug in.
I would say there are times where you want it to crash, and there are times where you don't necessarily want it to crash. The good example is an outlet. I mean, if an outlet crashes with a bang, it's because your outlet is not an outlet anymore, and it's not connected anymore. So this is a good reason to crash, actually, because most probably something's going to be wrong if you don't have anything attached to that outlet.
Well, the bang is actually used for two different things. One is the implicitly unwrapped optional, which is what you're referring to. The other is force unwrapping, which is let's put a bug right here.
Yeah.
For both of us.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that like people who are just starting Swift, first they got to get optionals, then they got to get implicitly unwrapped optionals, and then if they're dealing with bridging into Objective-C, they got to realize that, well, optionals have just gotten a lot more confusing if you're trying to bridge anything, and you're going to see implicitly unwrapped a lot more, and it's going to go against some of the ideas that you thought about Swift. Now you've got to deal with them as if they were. I mean, it just gets, turtles all the way down. It just gets more and more confusing as you dig in.
Mm-hmm.
And I find, again, it just takes a little bit of time to, like, I do a presentation on optionals, and the first thing I point out is, guys, these are enums. This is not magic. This is an enum.
It's just some or nothing, right?
Yeah, and then it's an enum, and there's syntactic sugar. Now let's understand that.
Yeah. Well, this is yet another of those concepts which, at the end of the day, is not so hard to understand. Like when I started Objective-C, I was like, retain, release, memory management. What is this thing? I had done no memory management whatsoever since I came out of school. Because I was on the .NET train and whatnot, but at the end of the day, I understood this and was just counting +1, -1, and it kind of worked until Arc arrived, and I was happy I didn't have to do it anymore. Yeah. All right. Let me change gears and speak about this topic on designers and developers, which we started today with David, and we're gonna follow up tomorrow with Jessica. I am one of those developers which is a lot of time frustrated not to be a designer. Then again, me being colorblind is a good idea, not being a designer, because
bad idea. Should be a designer.
Yeah, potentially. But I remember, by the way, a couple of years ago telling to my customer that I had done his website, and what do you think about this yellow? And he told me it's a nice green. So I'm happy we have the RGB codes. Just copy paste them. But my point is, the ideal solution would be what you've explained, but it hasn't happened for me, at least. I've been trying to show the developers the wonders of storyboarding, and they were like, So I'm happy that they, at one point, discovered the wonders of Sketch and of not working with every single thing in bitmaps, but more in vectors, which is already one step achieved. Still, I see a lot of silos between designers and developers nowadays in the companies. And it's interesting because I feel like it's 1999 still. Like when I referred to the end of the last century because I used to work in a web agency where the designers were in an office and the developers were in an office. And back in the days, the designers had Macs, and this was the first time ever that I saw a Mac, and the developers back in the days had PCs. Which developer, except for the Mac developers, had a Mac in '99? A lot of people had PCs, but we're still somehow in those silos, not only for being in two different offices, but also for not sharing enough. So why do you think it is still like this today? Without selling your talk from tomorrow.
It's all the designer's fault.
Anyone?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm gonna talk about it tomorrow as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's true that I haven't seen a lot of collaboration between designers and developers. Most of the time it's also because, yeah, we are sitting into separate rooms. But yeah, there's not enough of willingness from both sides to learn about the others. In this sense, I've been lucky because I married a developer. So
So that's what you get for it. So you should all marry a developer.
yeah.
Every single one of you here. Or a designer. Yeah, sure. Sorry. Or a designer.
Yeah, but actually it opened my eyes, to be honest, because as soon as he started programming, I just got interested. Like he decided to make his first application. That's when I got interested in design, actually. So I think I have to thank him.
Yeah.
Or not. But yeah, just seeing the way he actually does what he does, it helps me like make more informed decisions. So when I started being a designer in a company, I was always looking for the developer. So I was always going to him, and we were working side by side. So when he was actually implementing what I was doing, then we were both learning from each other. So I was learning what he was doing, and then he was learning why I did what I did. So I guess if every developer just starts like having a better relationship with the designer, everything will be better. Because at the end of the day, we just do the same job. Like we just want to make great products. We just want to make products that are useful and people are happy. So
of course, not every single designer can marry a developer and the other way around. I mean, Alex, is pretty much the case you also had at work. You worked with your wife on some project in the past, I think.
Yeah, but she's a psychologist.
Okay, that's probably. I was gonna say my wife is a teacher, so yeah, because that's a good way to do it. But obviously, we cannot date necessarily people which are in our industry. I mean, some of us are married with. I'm not even married with teachers or stuff like that. So we need to find another way without dating the people.
Yeah, I guess you do have this problem. Anyway, I think there is a lot of not misunderstanding, not even that. I wouldn't know how to put it, but we as developers, software engineers, whatever we want to call ourselves, we have to understand that designers not only try to make things pretty, but they are actually trying to solve the problem for which the solution we are going to implement. And that's the key point. sometimes I've met designers that do not think about anything at all, as well as the developers that just write some random lines of code to try to solve a problem and it doesn't, or that even look at a design from a designer, of course, and implement it, and it doesn't look anything like it, and they say, "Oh, no, it's the same," when it's clearly not. So I think we just have to pay more attention to what the other is doing, but also trying to understand why they took some decisions.
I think it has a lot to do with ego, because I met designers as well as developers which are just divas. They think they are doing art, just art, and you have to praise them for either developing holy grails or designing the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. And when those two, so basically the same character but with different disciplines come together, it just has to be war. Yeah. And basically, I think we just have to drive back our egos there and really focus on what you said. We are making a product together and basically want to solve a problem out there and not just drive our egos.
Of course, they are always the unicorns, but
Sure, and rock stars.
Don't forget ninjas.
I'm a ninja.
Yeah.
Real quick, stuff. The funny thing is I'm actually colorblind. So for me,
let's make a group.
I'm our WCAG color contrast compliance police officer, right? So it's it's interesting to be a designer and kind of represent a group that has an accessibility aspect. Look, for me, it comes down to empathy, right? And it's just understanding the work that is done from one group versus the other. And this is a very funny story. I was telling someone during the break that the question came up of it must took some time to learn storyboards and Xcode, didn't just happen overnight, right? And that breaking moment for me to realize that I can work in storyboards, I can write Swift, was seeing an engineer get equally as frustrated with provisioning profiles as I did. And I'm like, oh, you too? This makes you just want to break your computer? It became relatable, right? And it became this sort of dialogue of being able to learn from one another, and the same with design too. With design, it's no magic. It's just what James said. It's just a lot of hard work and just making a lot of crap and throwing that away and really learning together in that sense. So I think there's no silver bullet to this, but it's really about being in the same room and walking through the process together and just talking to each other, quite frankly, is really the first start to kind of bridging that gap.
We had a question in the audience.
Yeah. Just shout it and we'll repeat it.
I think you miss two other groups of persons in this setup.
So we're missing two other groups of persons. Testers and users. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good question.
And programming is one thing.
Yeah.
Together, but program and design for users, and testers have to check what you're doing.
So we can marry all together:
Certainly.
testers, users, developers, designers. Make a big party.
Actually, you have the exact same problems between every groups. So if you have devs and ops, they are fighting against each other like designers and developers. And when you have your product or program managers, they are fighting against your developer and UX guys and girls. So it's everywhere those fighting for their own discipline, because I don't know why, I just think it's ego. It needs to be, because otherwise, why would I fight a good thought of someone from another discipline? How often did I ask the designers why something happens in the design? And they just said, you're here to develop this. So sorry, that's really a hard thing. So thank you for being here and being cross discipline.
Thank you for using storyboard.
But that's basically an unthinkable thing of those designers with whom I worked. they won't have touched this because that's coding stuff. That's what you do, right? You do the implementation stuff.
Sometimes I explain to designers that storyboard is basically like Photoshop 1.0 in the 80s in terms of the graphical options you have, and especially because the layers are the other way around, which confuses everyone. Like, oh, wait a minute! Like, but it's funny because you were mentioning people being frustrated with developer profiles, I teach a lot over the years, and I also did those girls' days things. And at one point, you would be like teaching in a room, and there's a problem you cannot solve, and like everybody's looking at you like you would know how to do it. But I always go like, I have no idea as well. And all of a sudden, it makes you very human because they realize, oh, actually, it doesn't have superpowers. But yeah.
Never let them see you sweat.
Yeah, exactly. Like always pretend I totally know what I'm doing. You know this animated GIF of the dog. I don't know what I'm doing. All right. Anyone else? Nope.
No, I just wanted to add that, it's true that there are not only developers and designers in a company. You have all sorts of people responsible for different parts.
Especially the one who paid you.
Especially the clients, especially the customers or whoever is paying you. But the same as she mentioned clearly, the same applies to each component within the organization. It's not only developers and designers who have to try to understand each other, but every part of the company needs to understand what the other do and why it's important that they do what they do.
Yeah, I do think that's important. But the one provocation I want to make is that I think with design and engineering is kind of like brothers and sisters in arms, and we're at the best place to make things tangible, right? And like by us working on it together, like we can push a lot of these areas. But I do want to acknowledge, there's definitely those other aspects of the business, but this is why these two practices and functions need to work closer together.
But I guess I think that's the thing. We have to meet each other at eye level, and a lot of people are seeing developers or op people might see them as the very last piece in the chain. So the main idea making, the cool creative process is done by the smart people, and then they're just the engineers. And I think it's very top-down thought, but basically we have to be on eye level actually, and that would help a lot. But that's not often the case.
Yeah, and I think that's why I mentioned like for us, like looping engineers in the product definition and ideation is really important. And in fact, if I ever hear anyone say like just code it, like I get extremely upset, right? It's like the same as us being called pixel pushers, right? Like nobody wants that sort of mutual, like, that animosity. So one of the things we actually have done in the past too is that for like a designer starting out, one of the things they have to do in their first week is just create a branch and do a pull request just to understand the process of that. It's a tiny little thing, but again, just really being able to understand that. But I agree with you. It's like the people who are building like need to be involved like early in the process.
Yeah, I think Jessica is going to talk about it extensively tomorrow.
Yeah. All right. So I did more ethical question. I did technical question. Now I'm moving to the fanboy questions, because next week on the 12th, this time Apple was really mean at us and didn't make the keynote during the conference, which they did last year. Next year we're gonna have the launch of potentially a new iPhone, potentially a new watch, potentially some crazy stuff, whatever. I don't know. A cooking plate from Apple. I don't know. And I wonder what everyone is expecting in the short and longer terms. And the reason I'm asking the longer term question is because tomorrow we're going to have a talk about AR. So don't speak too much about your talk. Leave us a little bit expectations. But there is this longer term view of the product that Apple are presenting, because every time they present something new, well, first of all, every time they present the API at WWDC, you can sometime always think about what the next product is going to be a couple of months later. And then on the longer term, you can think about the rest. So does anybody wants to start on the expectations and all the stuff, the funny stuff that we've seen? One of those being no no touch ID, for example, the face detection, for example, all the crazy stuff they're gonna do with AR or whatnot. Where are the mics? Over there. 2 mics.
Well, it's always hard to guess for the hardware part, I guess, because sometimes they're not ready and they're actually not going to introduce it. I'm pretty sure, like, I mean, we've seen, like, with AR, you were mentioning it already, the iPhone 6 Plus with the 2 camera is a big advantage, right? Because 2 camera give you a better depth perspective than 1. I assume that they're going to try to generalize that, even like correcting the error of the fact that the 2 camera are like this, which when you put your device like that is not really interesting in terms of perspective. You look all different.
Okay.
And so I expect like some, for me, I wish at least, don't expect some change in that field. And also they're really late in the full AR world about what they can implement as chip in the device to have like a real position in the world and stuff like that. But as you mentioned also in the API, that what we see and we can predict. Obviously, they're banking a lot on core ML, and I think I will not be surprised that they will provide more and more. Already, like you can import model, but I think like one of the main thing of Apple is the tool sets. Like I don't know if anybody have tried like the Android tool set, but that's not the same. And I think they're going to bring more tools about those kind of things, like easier to import ML, easier to build up some AR capabilities.
Just a quick question on the 2 cameras. So right now they are this way if you hold your phone like this, and on the next, the rumors pictures show that they are flipping it.
Yeah, because when you put the phone like this.
Yeah.
So when if
but on one side or the other, it's going to be wrong, right?
Right, but I think
unless they have 3.
I think for me, like, if you, I mean, that's my perspective. If you think about AR, the phone become really more, it's a view into the AR, but also controller into the AR. And you mainly hold the controller like this, not, just like this. So, for most use case, I guess it will be more normal.
Okay, it's the first time I get the explanation why the orientation potentially changed. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, if you're right, yeah, you have to come back on Tuesday, though. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think for me, like my personal opinion, there's a couple of things here. I'm particularly interested as someone who's working in the health space, seeing what they do with WatchOS and some of that continuation. I think too, just with the anniversary of 10 years iPhone, we're going to see something that's a little more invisible to what we might think, right? Which is kind of like the death march from smartphones, right? And really thinking about voice, IoT, and in AR. Like for me, like my personal opinion is that I don't think ARKit makes sense on like a smartphone, but maybe something that we'll get in the future, right? So yeah, so it's like kind of interesting to see like such a landmark anniversary, but it's probably like thinking about like with Core ML, like Siri and like voice, thinking about how interaction is going to happen like coming in the future. So for me personally, it's just the expected things that we'll see, but I think it's going to be the beginning of something new in the next decade.
Everyone, no one is talking about HomePods, the wonderful speaker, the wonderful music speaker that should come out and hopefully be amazing.
But you're going to speak about it.
Yeah, at the end of the year, but hopefully they'll talk about it on September 12th. Hopefully they'll be like, this is the day that it'll happen someday before December.
But by the way,
on the iMac Pro,
but by the way, I hate it when Apple is like, "Oh, we have this new product, but it's only shipping in 6 months." I'm like, "Oh, God,
you stop your complaining about that.
Don't tell me. Don't
stop
tell
your
me.
Complaining about that.
Yeah. Dude, I'm a developer.
Christmas. You're gonna get a new iPhone.
Yeah, because you think my mom is gonna give me a HomePod for Christmas or what?
Save a little extra.
She loves me. All right, go ahead, TJ.
Does your mom love you? Yes.
I think she does just before the HomePod price.
Yes.
There's a question.
$2 short.
Somebody at the back of the room.
Yeah.
While you're at it, one question. Do you really think voice control will be the future? I see that kind of the smartphone, yes, that's probably especially that we're talking about the HomePod. I now have a family. That's one thing.
You had one before as well.
Yes, but that means like 100 years ago, I was still single. I wasn't married. I didn't have kids.
You're not that old.
Almost. And I have Siri with me wherever I go. I have an iPhone, I have a watch. I can always talk to Siri when I feel like it. Personally, I do not see any reason why I want to have Alexa or HomePod or any of those in my living room. One, I don't want them to listen all the time. Well, my iPhone does too. Two, I don't see a benefit. Three, my house is always noisy. There are kids running around. So
I can relate.
I know that everybody is talking about Alexa and HomePod and whatever. It's something that so to the panel, do you really think that is the way people will be interested?
So I have to repeat your question in like 5 seconds for the stream. It's a very simple question. Do you think voice recognition and HomePod and Siri and whatnot is the future? I kind of agree with you. I am not the kind of person who speaks a lot to Siri, and I'm not the kind of person who wants to have a HomePod at home, at least for the listening part of it. But I think, or I fear, that it's the way a lot of people want to go.
I actually want to go that way, to be honest. Jessica and I already speak with Alexa quite often in the morning, especially asking about the weather, since she's no good for anything else. But that said, as these technologies get smarter or more capable, I believe they're gonna become part of our lives in more depth than they could be now. So looking at the future, I feel they're going to be more and more part of our lives.
TJ, you wanted to say something? Because you started with a HomePod.
Yes. I think that voice... So there are a couple things. Like one, in terms of noisiness and all of that, I think that at some point the technology will get to a point where you can pick a voice out and like pick a certain audio stream out, because in certain ways we are there already. It's hard, and I don't imagine it'll be very soon, but that's simple enough. In terms of conversationality and things like that, I think we have a long way to go before context is carried properly as though you were talking to another person. And I also think that machine learning is not, machine learning, at least how we employ it right now, isn't necessarily the answer for as many problems as we think it is. But I do think overall voice and just basically different interfaces, because I don't think that David was arguing that voice by itself is really the future, but just that smartphones aren't, right? That at some point, it's different presentations of screens and different modes of interaction and whatnot, including voice, including gesture, and including other things, right, are going to be how we do it. And I do believe in that. Like, I agree that being able to talk certain instructions is definitely correct for certain things that you want to do at home, like starting a timer, or asking about the weather, or asking what's happening in the rest of your day, or what to-dos you have, right? Like just sort of, I have information stored and I could pull my phone out to check on that information. But even that, when you think about sort of, you pull your phone out, you press the home button, you navigate to the app you want, you scroll to the information you want. If you know what information you want before you pulled your phone out, if you could just say that and have the phone actually understand what you wanted, that's always going to win. Because it's just like you have someone in the room to answer your question, like a secretary.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, TJ, because, I think that's definitely what I was wanting to convey, is that...
I understood that. My question was,
right.
Do you really think voice is one of those?
I think it's one of the aspects of it. Yeah, I think to what TJ said, it's kind of moving away from displays and really seeing the displays now like the home environment or just whatever environment that you're in. So it plays a big part. I do think it's more about potentially conversation as opposed to voice, where conversation could be like chat or messages, or it doesn't even have to be a human to machine interaction, right? It could be other microservices that like are communicating with that. I think, you know, in my mind, like we thought we were entering a world of Minority Report where it's like touching all these displays and it's looking more like a future like the film Her, right, where things are invoked by perhaps voice or conversation, and what you need comes up at the time of that. I don't think voice alone is going to win that, but I think haptic feedback is going to be like a big piece too, but it's kind of like this sort of more tangible interactions that we can kind of feel here. Basically all the other senses aside from C.
Well, I have a question for you, actually. Do your children interact with Alexa?
They interact with Siri on the phone.
Okay, with Siri, but do they interact with Siri in a awkward fashion, a age-appropriate fashion? Are they doing more and more with it?
I would say a very age-appropriate interaction and a very smart interaction, where my son just told me, I was running to the bus and I didn't want to type, so I just said, tell mom I'm coming home.
So I have the same thing, and we have kids of about the same age, at least some of our kids. And my older ones is actually using Siri than much more than I am. She's 11, and she tells me, yeah, I ask Siri this and that and this and that. Like she Googles with Siri, obviously. I wouldn't think about it.
Yeah.
But you weren't finished, right?
I mean, my 4-year-old daughter, my 3-foot method, my wife, for some reason, bought an Alexa, Echo or whatever the hell it's called. And my daughter will tell it, hey, play music. Alexa, play music. Tell it to stop. Tell it to start a timer. So for her, that whole interaction is going to be natural as she progresses. Mm-hmm. For me, I don't talk to the damn thing. I've got no interest. But for her, that's going to be the way she interacts with certain types of appliances. So I don't really think it's more about us getting used to it. I think it's really more about this, as this technology progresses, the people who have grown up with it are going to be more and more comfortable with it, so that when we finally get to the point where we can do the things that are in the Google video or the Apple videos, where it's like, you know, Siri, book me this, blah, 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 at this time. Oh, how do I look? You know, that sort of thing. Yeah. They're going to be used to it. They're going to be comfortable with it. Yeah. Me, I just think it's weird. But I think it's really more about, as this progresses, my children, my daughter, will be very comfortable with that idea. Whereas, like, we may be all right with talking to the phone. I'll talk to the refrigerator. What do you have in you? Oh, I'll talk to this mirror. Oh, I'll talk to that.
What do you have in you? What's the refrigerator? I never thought about this, but it makes sense.
Yeah. And I have a very tiny nit to pick, and then this man has been very patient. He had a question. Siri is not always listening. It is not.
Yes, it is. On the new phone, it's listening for activation.
I'm not.
It's the 6S.
He's doing 6, but it listens for the phrase.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, if it would have been like that, some smart guy, like, I always forget his name, but you know, that English guy who reverse engineers everything.
In terms of bandwidth or whatever.
Anyway, somebody who would have find it out that they are sending everything. I think they actually are listening. Yeah, they're listening. But the question is, somebody would probably find it out that they whatever save it. But yeah, go on, because you weren't done, right? Or you were?
Yeah, I mean, I was just saying that I actually think that the distinction that's being drawn of they're listening for the phrase and then they start listening, which is why there's that annoying pause in between saying the phrase and then being able to actually give input. Like, I think that that's an important distinction, that it's not always listening. And there's a downside to not always listening in the way that is sort of creepy is that, there's a delay, but the upside is that I feel that there's a little bit less to worry about in terms of like, I don't want a microphone. I don't want to add mics because I actually really don't want to add mics, right? Like I'm going to buy a HomePod. I have accepted this in my heart, but I was very much like, I don't want the echo. I don't want I don't want to add mics to my home. And part of it is concern over like, you can't be sure. You can't be sure that they're not listening, but to some extent you can be, especially because Apple very much has made it clear that they don't want more information about you than they have expressed, right? And part of that is me drinking the Kool-Aid and buying into it, but they've been pretty consistent about it.
Yeah, I like Amazon. One last thing I wanted to add is that regarding the voice as a form of a response from these devices, I think that moving forward we'll see more ways to have these kind of conversations being held in private with your phone or with your devices. So HomePod is perhaps not the best use case because it's home-wise. It feels your home, but things like Siri on your phone probably will be better expressed in the future using earphones or whatever.
But that's actually what I thought of phones too. A phone is a very private device, right? So we are texting a lot, our generation, and I thought you're never going to voice dictate something to your phone in public.
Yeah, especially private.
But the teens are doing it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think this is a creepy part of it. Is a lot of us won't accept it, but it's going to be accepted by the next or the current generation, whatever. And it's a big of a social acceptance. It's obviously very weird to double tap on your AirPod and say sound louder, which is the most stupid comment you can ever say. Sound louder. But I think it's going to be socially accepted at one point, and I will speak about a little bit about AirPods after that, but I think I will let first Hubert ask us.
I think voice is very much about accessibility. Most of us actually forgot that the keyboard was one of the biggest hurdles for childs to access a computer. The mouse was a little tiny step, but when it got to touch, it exploded. 3-year-old, 2-year-olds can just use a computer. And if you then realize that you have to be able to read something to operate a computer, whether you are blind or you didn't have learned to read, you can use voice. Voice is much more natural. So we will add another couple of users, which will be from 3 to reading age to our users. And that's a good thing about it. I don't see that the gadgets used, voice is used for like shopping at Amazon or just asking for the weather is the killer app. But seeing that a lot of more people people with accessibility issues can just access computers, and this will untighten a lot of talent, a lot of possibilities, and you will see what happens. You saw it when childs were able to use computers, and I saw it myself. A 10-year-old boy was just coding in about 20 minutes, what I would call a game, when there was a right platform, like, Swift Playground. In this case, it was Scratch. So you will see amazing things if you look at it. If you only look at your perspective, like voice is annoying, voice is nobody talks with a computer and things like that. That's not it. Look at the people who do it for the first time, the children and people who couldn't use a computer because of texting, keyboard, whatever. Not everybody is texting.
With most of our generation, actually, but it's super interesting to see that this is shifting.
I hope it for the cars. that they don't text anymore. I'm a motorcycle driver. I hate it. And I hate it for a reason.
You should not text while you drive.
Well,
a
there's
motorcycle.
there's this drive mode now in iOS 11. Although, to be honest, anybody understood how this is supposed to work? Because I always have to press on the button, right? Isn't it supposed to like discover that you are in the car or whatever?
I can tell you after.
Yeah, I'm coming with the microphone to Juan. Yeah, you see the microphone goes until you have a question as well.
Actually, I was going to say almost the same as he did. There's more an accessibility thing with the voice. Hands-free, a lot of people spend time on the car, and for the other thing that I want to mention is like the HomePod is the only one of these gadgets that actually takes care quality of sound into account, because Alexa's music played through Alexa's or HomePods are really, I wouldn't listen to that, but the HomePod sounds like an alternative to at least a good sounding sound system at home.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about for getting it. I just wanted to say being here is very interesting. You guys look even more beautiful from here as from there. It's looks like family pictures. So I'm going back to the family. Sorry. Yeah, you have a question? All right. Oh yeah, you can answer my question.
I'm not sure if it's a question.
Sorry. Or an answer to.
One thing that I always think is like talking or communicating with voice is something that we learned for, like we're doing it for decades, like as human beings or as people. And what I find interesting that I think we expect a lot if we talk to someone or something. Actually, I think we expect a lot more than typing something and waiting for a response. And also, I figured with Alexa, what happened to me, I would casually talk to her or it, and she wouldn't understand. And so I had to learn how to say things actually to get the results. And I think at a point where it actually understands you, whatever you say, that's a huge difference. That makes a difference for me when it really becomes interesting for everyone.
So yeah, the one thing that I would say though is if I'm going to use one of those products, it's not necessarily from a company from which I know the business model. That's the only thing, because the business model of the company using this technology is very important. What kind of data do they want from you?
Sure. So your statement just now was about voice and what we expect in a conversation. So I think that's part of what I was getting at with ML and sort of like how we ML. It's just funny to use ML for that because that's not what ML stands for. But talking about machine learning and sort of conversation and all of that, I think we do have to actually accept to a certain extent, and I think young people are much better at it, that there is an interface to voice controlling things, and that some of that is learning the commands and learning what we can say and what we can't say. I think that we were promised things by movies that are not reasonable right now. I mean, especially when you think about how, think about teaching an adult a new language and how many caveats there are and how many, sort of weird constructions of sentences there are. And then being like, well, why can't the computer do that? It's a computer. Well, right. And I think that some work has to be done from humans to just sort of accept that, there is a little bit of syntactic difference that I'll have to use when I'm talking to that. I'm going to code switch when I talk to a computer. But I also think that the way that we model and talk about like domains of knowledge in terms of programming needs to change, because I just think it's untenable right now, this whole machine learning approach where we say, we'll just give it a body of text or a body of speech, and then we'll say what we know it was trying to say. I think we need to work towards modeling knowledge in a more broad sense, and sort of giving the computer knowledge of like whatever things we're talking about. So that that's a little bit better. But those are all very broad approaches, right? And broad answers that don't say what will happen in the next 2 or 3 years. I just think that overall, we will get to a point where we can have something closer to a conversation, and the computer will know when to sort of drop context and switch context and things like that. But that's just hard, right?
So it's interesting because we spoke about the phone, we spoke about the HomePod. Thanks for bringing that in, because I would have forgotten that product, which is going to be pretty important in the future. Yeah, but we forgot to speak about one little detail, which is the Apple Watch. So how many Apple Watches in there? Just raise your hand. That's a good amount of nerds. So I would agree that it is not yet the best smartwatch ever or the best watch ever, and especially when you have a 38 millimeters, because it drains the battery with WatchOS 4 after a couple of hours. But speaking of audio and whatnot, the watch with the AirPods, which are, by the way, on an environmental perspective, me saying that as a green, a total catastrophe, but as a nerd, totally awesome. The combination of both and voice commands and the potential that in the future we won't have to carry around a phone all the time is actually pretty amazing, because not having to have this big brick in your pocket, but have just only this and potentially the AirPods when you get a call. And what are you going to do when you want to message or whatever? Well, this is where voice comes into place.
How large are bricks in Europe?
We built no. Let me rephrase it. We build houses in Germany out of iPhones because we can.
How much do those cost?
Huh? Bricks are very expensive here, by the way. Yeah. So, but you know what I mean. Take a microphone to speak. Yep.
I think the watch will have some novelty already. We all saw that now, like, the watch is capable of Bluetooth by itself. If any of you are also in IoT. And that's a big thing, which means, like, when you go for a run or whatever, if you have like some kind of sensor device, now your watch could communicate with it without having your phone. And for Apple to say, like, you can use the watch without an iPhone is already a big statement, because, well, they sell iPhone also and more than watch. And I think there will probably also be some extra connectivity introduced to the watch. That's one of my guesses.
Well, that's what I'm speaking about, and like being independent. Like think about the way you used to have iTunes to buy music or to fill in your iPod, and at one point you could do everything from the phone and not have to plug your damn, except when you want to do a backup, obviously.
Yeah, I will not even be surprised of having like a kind of like the Kindle way of communication for the watch, like maybe just to receive text or whatever. And also, like, I don't know, like, a lot of people have talked about the fact that there's actually some kind of sensor connection in the wrist of the watch, wristband. And I think, we went to one of the Paris session of Apple this year, and there was a lot of indicating about, like, new sensors or whatever. So, I think there will be some stuff about it, too.
I think there will be. Anyone else? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'll just kind of describe like my dream commute, and I'm getting to a point here, is that and I think a lot of it's continuity. So I hate carrying my laptop around, and I'd love just to be able to walk to work and just feel like a human and just go on a nice walk and not have to think about these things. But if you're able to like authenticate, via iCloud or whatever sort of security like protocols you might have at work, where like you wearing a device is actually like a very secure way for you to be able to just log in and just kind of be a little bit more seamless in your work. And like from my perspective, that's always been like how long has continuity been around, right? And I think that was always the end game, to be able to like interact with other devices, and having the watch kind of be that hub, or like the TV at home being that facilitator of some of these interactions. So for me, I'm still wearing a Series 0, but still love it. And so I hope I hope there's going to be some cool stuff coming from there.
It's interesting you call it the Series 0. Yeah. Reminds me the story of the numbers at Apple, where Steve Wozniak said, "I'll be number 1," and then Steve Jobs said, "Well, then I'll be number 0."
You always count starting with 0.
Yeah, employee number 0. Yeah. You want to say something, because we're gonna slowly wrap it up, because I'm seeing the guy with the food. No. I'm seeing outside. I'm seeing outside the food waiting for you guys. That's one.
And you.
Yeah. No.
I sort of want to provide a little bit of a counterpoint to that. I actually dread don't dread, but like I'm worried about what will happen when more interactions get pushed away from like a phone or a computer, like a laptop, because I like to deal with, sort of USB, like MIDI interfaces and controllers and things like that, things that you want to plug in. And if the phone gets phased out for the watch, thinking about battery life, and when you plug in something that has power draw for like LEDs and all sorts of stuff like that, like the watch that's gonna die.
Yeah, true.
And so just trying to find the right balance between like, all right, well, sometimes I want this, and I don't want it to be this thing where enough focus is taken away from the platform that can power these easily and can do this, that you're like, well, it's not even, it's like no longer fun or even tenable really to work with it.
Not that I'm expecting.
In the future, your watch will charge over your body. Will take the energy of your body and the end of the.
I guess in terms of work and more powerful stuff.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I guess that with work-related stuff, or at least things that require more power, the iPad is going to play a huge part into that, because it's already the most portable device I have.
Yeah. All right. Let me ask a last question, and then we close this panel, because I want to have your take on every single of one, but a few, not every single, but many people. And then we're going to close this like we have another 5 or 10 minutes, let's say 10 minutes. The last one is about the fact that we've seen so many things happening differently on our community since the open sourcing of Swift, for example, and Swift coming on the server, for example, and a lot of stuff like that where you would have imagined that we see more people coming from outside, coming from other communities, going inside. I see a little bit of this, but I don't see that enough. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I think so.
Whoever starts.
Five.
Whoever starts.
I talked enough, I suppose. You can start.
Well, I was going to say this is me, right? I'm not an iOS developer, and I didn't come from a kind of iOS background. I've come from building cloud backend software and now starting to use Swift on the server side. So yeah, I think it's going to be really, really popular. You've seen since Apple open source the language how much it's kind of interest in it has grown, right? It's now in the top 20 most popular languages according to some rankings, and that's in like 2 or 3 years. So yeah, I think your community is going to grow, and it's going to be very different, I think, as other people. You've seen lots of people come from, if you look at JavaScript, which is incredibly popular, what everyone wants now is types, right?
TypeScript.
Everyone wants types in JavaScript, right? Whether you use TypeScript or use like Flow, this is some kind of framework from Facebook, and then actually I've seen other people, prominent JavaScript developers, getting into TypeScript now, because people have decided actually when you're running in the cloud, often one of the downsides with some of these new platforms, it's hard to debug. You can't just jump into the server and look at the logs or like look at the system calls. So you want to do as much support for you as a developer locally to catch bugs early, and that's kind of what types give you. And it's nice that you compile your code and it's like you've got all these bugs. So with the JavaScript, it's like, well, whatever, it might run, it might not. You'll just have to run it and decide.
You have no business writing bugs in the first place.
Is it an array? Yeah. So, it's nice to have some more help than just like, well, it could be an array, it could be an object. Who cares? Just do what you want with it.
But by the way, part of the reason why I asked the question is because I want to do a full circle to the discussion about diversity at the beginning, because I've been involved in other communities in the past. One of these is total kind of at the opposite of Swift, is the WordPress community, where when you go to a WordPress conference, it's a mix of developers, users, designers, 50-50 in terms of women and men, and it's totally different than all those cool conferences where we go at. And I think one of the reasons that I like opening with the other communities is that it brings fresh water into our community.
Yeah,
So-
I see Swift being certainly part of that. I think Swift will attract more people to work on other platforms like the server. excuse me, from other communities more than iOS and Mac, to be honest. Of course, it's attractive, and I'll talk about it tomorrow. But yeah, I think most people will start looking from the outside to Swift towards things like the server or kernels or other technologies where Swift can be implemented.
Oh, that's a very good end. That's an amazing
Super
end.
Mario, yeah.
You know, Mario, I will call this in the future the Miracle.
Yeah, I think so.
We might have some licensing issue with using that on the stream. If I get a report from YouTube because Nintendo is suing me, we'll know about that.
Whoops.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. I think it's, people are going to embrace Swift first from the outside for other parts of the stack.
Now everybody knows you've been playing Mario all day long.
Yeah.
I think,
and we quick because we're gonna wrap it up. But go ahead.
So I think one of the next points or watershed moments will be when we get memory the memory management annotations that Lattner has proposed a few times, because right now it's Swift isn't applicable or isn't great in certain time critical or memory critical situations, and I think that'll really help with like kernels and media related things like audio and video and news situations. So I think that it will only become more attractive as time goes on, I think, for other things.
Jeff, you're gonna wrap it up.
If you actually care about bringing more people into your community, you need to dial down the whole "you're not writing idiomatic Swift. You're not doing it the right way." You need to care less about the fact that people aren't doing it your way and just care about the fact that they're participating. Bring them in, help them get up to speed, and they'll write Swift the way they want to write Swift. And that's fine. They can write it with objects. They can write it with bangs all over the place. It's their code. If it wants to crash, that's fine. Because maybe all they're doing is building a test app. Maybe all they're doing is building a prototype. But you know what? They're expanding your community because maybe they're designers. Maybe they're testers who are building a little test app. Your community just became a little bit richer. And if you drive them away by saying you're writing Swift wrong, they'll do it in Python, or they'll do it in JavaScript, or they'll do it in Ruby.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing that in the server-side frameworks kind of things. The major three ones differ widely in terms of how they use Swift, but they all reach the same goal. So yeah, kudos to them.
All right, we're gonna wrap it up. So first of all, I want you to give them an amazing round of applause for those beautiful people. Exactly. So it has been a pleasure for this first day. I hope you guys had an amazing first day. It's only the beginning of the first day, actually, because it's like at Dub Dub. There's the conference, and then there is the evening. There's the bash. Well, we have no bash. I'm sorry, we don't have a very expensive band playing and with very loud music. But what we do have is we have food outside, which is waiting for you. All kinds of food. And we still have a full fridge, which you cannot speak to, by the way. So don't stand in front of the fridge and say like, I would like a beer. But yeah, so go out.
Thank you.